It's 9:41 now. The government's long-awaited guidance for transgender children in schools in England is nearly here, but still hasn't been published. Never mind, because the Times' Steve Swinford has got all the detail in the paper and online today. So here are the key points.
First of all, schools will have to tell parents if their children wish to change gender. There will be narrow exemptions for children with safeguarding issues.
There'll be no duty on schools to facilitate a child who wants to change gender.
Teachers and pupils won't have to address children by their chosen pronouns, but they will be advised to use their chosen name.
Single-sex changing facilities and toilets must be provided.
Children who change gender identity will be barred from contact sports with the opposite sex.
But there is no outright ban on social transitioning, and doctors are not required to be involved. Let's get the perspective of Katie John Went, a commentator and activist. She is transgender and runs a support group for parents of transgender children. Good morning to you, Katie.
Hi.
What do you make then of what we think is going to be in the guidance, what we just read out there?
Well, it's non-statutory. It's extended further advice. I think it gives enough wriggle room for everyone. Ultimately, it puts the pressure on teachers to make choices again, and it gives them opt-outs and opt-ins, which is going to create its own dilemmas again, because they would much rather have stronger guidance that's either all in or all out, so they know where they stand. I imagine teachers' unions will back the teachers to do what they think is right for the well-being of their pupils, to enable them to get on with their education. And at the end of the day, if social transitioning helps that, then great. I mean, I do know, I've worked with trans teenagers, and I run a support group for parents, as you mentioned. And in that situation, you do get these difficult ones, which has still been given an opt-out as well, whereby you might have, for example, divorced parents, where one parent supports the child's transition, one person doesn't, or where there's kind of literal bullying at home around a child's identity and not supporting even simply the exploration of that identity. And as a result, the teachers have to make a decision around what is healthiest for the child. Is it healthy for the child to be able to be out at school and then not out at home? Well, sometimes that's the decision to be made. I think there is enough wriggle room in it, and actually common sense teachers will still, follow what they think is best practice.
These exemptions, so hang on, schools will have to tell parents if the children wish to change gender, but there'll be narrow exemptions, which you just kind of outlined there, if there's trouble between the parents and the child about their desire to transition. How common is that? Because you work with parents and children.
Well, I know of sufficient cases that, specifically over the last 10 plus years, so I know it happens. And I've known kids that have ended up leaving home, and essentially these have been kids like 16 plus, but essentially left home and become homeless because of the situation at home. So when you're regarding safeguarding like that, the exemption is there. And you'll find, and I've spoken to teachers who have actually been the confidants of teens, and that's not just around trans, it's sometimes around all kinds of issues. And it puts teachers in a double bind of actually having kind of loco parentis to us at school. And when do they report when there is, abuse or non-support or all kinds of things going on at home? So I think teachers spend like 6 to 8 hours a day with your kids. They often spend more time with your kids than a parent does sometimes. And I kind of fostered a kid way back with my ex-wife, and went through the whole situation of having to negotiate on a daily basis with staff at a school how to manage behaviour, how to manage things that the child has brought to school, because the home situation comes to school and vice versa. They're not entirely two separate worlds, and the child's psychological health and physical safety have always got to be paramount, and it's not always clear when they are, which is why the exercise of common sense and kind of well-being and safeguarding have to be paramount regardless.
Katie, you're obviously very informed in this area, and that people who are perhaps less informed but still concerned, still have a stake in this, sometimes get in touch with us and say, at my daughter's school, half of them say they want to be known by a different gender, and it is a phase for them because it's something that all their other friends are doing and they want to experiment and all the rest of it. Now, that may be true, it may not be true. Do you think that this kind of guidance might make it less appealing for children who perhaps do just want to do this because it's something their friends are doing?
Well, I think that there is a case around the fact that, we've heard the way words like social contagion and all the rest of it. It's more like social media, perhaps. But it is well known that there's between 25 and 50% of trans teens are on the autistic spectrum, ADHD, and a range of additional things going on. I think there's recognizing that we actually have like a mental health and well-being and anxiety contagion amongst teens is the serious question. And if kind of a degree of like social experimentation, we all did it. I'm in my 50s now. In the 70s and 80s, we all did it with clothing styles and music and bands and goths and emos and everything else. I don't think trans is necessarily the same category of social identity, but if it is held lightly so that's all it is treated as, then there's a degree of safety around allowing kids to experiment and to explore. And I think there's a big difference, and I do agree to an extent, that teachers should not engage in, nor should therapists, in overt affirmative positions on this, nor should they enter into kind of Maya Forster's kind of idea that we should be uprooting trans ideology. Somehow we need to be holding lightly children's desires to experiment and to explore, to discover if they're trans and or LGB, and or if it is just simply a tomboy expression or some other expression or need to belong or need to explore. Those should be held lightly. And I think it's possible to be supportive but not affirmative. And that's the kind of position we need to do. And I do agree with the guidance that on things like team contact sports, it's a legitimate thing to kind of have a much more hard and fast rule on that. And on the provision of toilets, it is quite appropriate to have single-sex facilities and perhaps to ensure that there are also single-use facilities that aren't only labelled disabled so that you're not taking up a disabled person's space or being seen as disabled if you enter that facility. So to have I've known plenty of schools that say please use the teachers instead, which creates a whole bunch of new awkwardnesses as well.
Right.
But designating some single-use facilities would solve that as well, including changing and kind of toilets.
Okay, Katie, thank you very much. That's Katie John Went, is a commentator and activist who runs a support group for parents of transgender children.
It's 11 minutes to 10 now. There's been